The year is 1258, and the Tigris River bleeds. History is about to witness the end of a vast world. Hulagu Khan didn't just bring war, he brought the absolute apocalypse to Baghdad's royal family. A caliph's arrogance cost the lives of everyone he loved in the vilest way possible to imagine. They didn't use swords on the princes. They used a technique that will make your stomach churn. The princesses, raised as untouchable jewels, faced a destiny far worse than death itself could be. What happened in that palace was erased from books for being too disturbing for anyone to read. Prepare to hear how gold and greed sealed the coffin of a millennial dynasty in just 1 week. The silence of Baghdad was broken by the sound of royal bones being crushed under heavy horses. Mongol brutality knew no limits, transforming kings into nothing more than dust in the wind. This is the real, uncensored story of how pride precedes the most painful fall in all history. To understand the scale of this tragedy, visualize Baghdad at its peak. It was the intellectual lighthouse of the planet, where science and art flourished while Europe lived in darkness. At the center of it all was Al-Mustasim, a ruler numb with his own ego. He believed his sacred lineage was a magic shield against steel, completely ignoring that an unstoppable storm was forming on the eastern horizon. Hulagu Khan, grandson of the legendary Genghis, did not care about prophecies or sacred lineages. For him, the world was a vast pasture to be conquered and submitted. He sent clear ultimatums, demanding total submission, but the caliph responded with empty insults and bravado disconnected from reality. Al-Mustasim trusted corrupt advisors who sold him the sweet lie that Baghdad was invincible, thus sealing the fate of his entire family. The awakening to reality was brutal and deafening. Mongol siege engineering, with its catapults and Chinese gunpowder, dismantled the city's defenses in days. What should have been a siege of months lasted less than 2 weeks. The panic that took over the streets of Baghdad was palpable. The smell of incense was replaced by the acrid odor of smoke and fear, as the city's elite realized their walls were nothing but paper against Mongol fire. Al-Mustasim's surrender is one of the most humiliating scenes in military history. He walked out of the city gates expecting to be treated with the dignity of a defeated monarch, perhaps hoping for a comfortable exile. Instead, he met Hulagu's icy gaze. The Mongol leader saw before him not a representative of God, but a weak man who hoarded riches while neglecting the defense of his own people and his own blood. The first act of psychological torture was a lesson on priorities. Hulagu discovered the caliph's vast secret treasure and ordered him to be locked inside it. Imagine the agony, dying of thirst and starvation surrounded by piles of gold and precious stones. If you had used this gold to defend your city, you wouldn't be here, Hulagu mocked. The caliph was forced to eat his wealth, a sadistic metaphor for his fatal and suicidal greed. But the caliph's physical suffering was only the prelude to true anguish. Hulagu ordered the entire royal family to be brought to the courtyard. Sons, daughters, nephews, the complete lineage of the Abbasids was dragged out of the harems and silk rooms. They were exposed to the filth and the predatory gazes of the steppe soldiers. Divine protection had failed, and now they were just meat at the mercy of hungry wolves. Princess Fatima, the eldest and most respected daughter, became the initial target to break her father's spirit. Known for her devotion and intellect, she was stripped of her humanity before Al-Mustasim's wide eyes. The Mongols didn't just want to kill, they wanted to desecrate the sacred symbol the family represented. The dynasty's honor was torn right there on the cold ground while the caliph watched, paralyzed and helpless. However, for the male princes, direct heirs to the throne, there was a technical problem. Mongol law, the Yasa, forbade spilling noble blood on the ground, as they believed it would bring spiritual curses. Hulagu, with his pragmatic and cruel mind, conceived a solution that respected the law but maximized the terror. He ordered the thick Persian carpets from the palace to be brought out, transforming court luxury into an instrument of execution. What followed is the nightmare that haunts history. The princes were rolled into the carpets like human cigars, tied tightly so they couldn't move. The Mongol cavalry then advanced. There was no sharp sound of swords, but rather the muffled, rhythmic and nauseating sound of heavy hooves crushing bodies. It was death by slow compression, where every pass of the horses broke one more part of the dynasty's hope. Al-Mustasim was forced to listen. He didn't see the blood, as the carpets contained it, but he heard his son's muffled screams turn into moans and finally into silence. That silence was the sound of the end of his lineage. Hulagu ensured the Caliph felt every second of that annihilation. The guilt weighed on him more than any chain. His inaction had transformed his beloved sons into a shapeless mass under the wool. The younger daughters, Zanab and Kadia, were spared immediate death, only to face an existence of servitude. They were distributed as war trophies among Hulagu's generals. From untouchable princesses, they became slaves in nomadic tents, forced to march to the distant steppes of Central Asia. Their identity was erased, their names forgotten. They disappeared into the cold vastness, taken far from everything they knew. There was a disturbing exception. Little Aisha. Hulagu decided to keep her in the Mongol court not as a wife, but as a kind of exotic pet. She was forced to live among her family's killers, wearing their clothes and learning their language. Aisha became a living symbol of total conquest, a breathing relic of Baghdad, held in captivity for the entertainment of the victors, surrounded by memories of the massacre. Then came the final moment for Al-Mustasim. Removed from his prison of gold, starving and psychologically destroyed, he was prepared for the same fate as his sons. But Hulagu added a touch of festive cruelty. The Caliph was rolled into a carpet and placed under the wooden floor of a large ceremonial tent. He would not be trampled by horses, but by the celebration of his enemy's victory. Hulagu and his generals held a banquet on those boards. While they ate roasted meat and drank kumis, the weight of their bodies and the vibration of their laughter pressed down on the Caliph below. Al-Mustasim died suffocated and slowly crushed, hearing the joy of those who destroyed his world. It was the ultimate humiliation, literally serving as the foundation for the barbarian party, dying in darkness and absolute oblivion. With the head of the dynasty cut off, the body of the empire suffered convulsions of horror. Baghdad was given over to rampant looting for 7 days. The civilian population was massacred without distinction. The streets became impassable due to piles of decomposing corpses. The irrigation system, the pride of local engineering, was destroyed, turning fertile gardens into desert and guaranteeing starvation for the few survivors. Mongol fury then turned against knowledge. The House of Wisdom, the world's greatest library, was violently evacuated. Rare manuscripts, Greek translations, astronomical and medical discoveries were thrown into the Tigris River. Legends say the water ran black with ink for days, then red with blood. Knowledge accumulated over centuries was dissolved in the mud, an incalculable intellectual setback for humanity. The smell of death in Baghdad was so intense that the Mongol army had to withdraw upwind days later. The city of peace had become an open-air necropolis. Those who survived emerged from the rubble like ghosts, unable to process the scale of the destruction. The social, religious, and economic structure was annihilated. There were no longer rich or poor, only victims of a total human catastrophe. The strategy behind this extreme brutality was calculated psychological terror. Hulagu wanted to send an unequivocal message to the rest of the Islamic world and to Europe. By treating the Caliph's sacred family as disposable trash, he proved that no one was safe. Fear paralyzed entire nations. Cities like Damascus opened their gates immediately, terrified by the mere possibility of repeating the royal family's fate. Think of the devastating loneliness of Aisha, living for decades in the Mongol court. She watched Hulagu's grandchildren grow, serving tea to the descendants of the men who ground her brothers to dust. Her survival was prolonged torture, a test of endurance in a hostile environment. She carried the memory of a dead civilization alone, with no one to share her pain or her mother tongue. She was the last prisoner of a forgotten war. Al-Mustasim's legacy remains as an eternal warning about the complacency of power. He believed the past would guarantee the future, that tradition would protect him from the violent innovation of Mongol warfare. He was wrong. History has no mercy on the unprepared. His failure to act, his refusal to see the real danger, was the true killer of his family. The Mongol sword only finished the job that arrogance began. The fall of Baghdad undoubtedly marked the end of the Islamic Golden Age. The intellectual center of gravity of the world was shattered. Scientists, philosophers, and poets were killed or fled to Cairo and the West. The scar left by 1258 never fully healed in the regional psyche. Optimism and scientific curiosity were replaced by a defensive conservatism, born from the trauma of seeing the light of reason extinguished by brute force. The hypocrisy of the carpet method is fascinating and sickening. The Mongols believed they were being pious by not shedding royal blood. This moral distortion shows how human beings can rationalize any atrocity through cultural or religious lenses. For the princes screaming in the darkness of the wool, Mongol theology was irrelevant. Only the crushing pain and the certainty of the end mattered in that moment of absolute terror. While we focus on royalty, we cannot forget the million anonymous people who perished. The baker, the blacksmith, the nursing mother, all had their worlds destroyed. The tragedy of the Caliph is the symbol, but the suffering was democratic. The destruction of basic infrastructure condemned the region to centuries of economic decline. The fertile land became barren, mirroring the void left by the death of leadership and culture. The story of Baghdad is an uncomfortable mirror for our own modern civilization. We build skyscrapers, accumulate data in the cloud, and feel safe in our technological bubbles. But fragility is inherent in any complex society. A black swan event, an overwhelming external force, can dismantle centuries of progress in days. Are we really safer than Al-Mustasim, or just more deluded? The specific fate of women, used as bargaining chips and objects of humiliation, highlights the darkest face of ancient warfare. Zanab and Kadia did not have their stories written by the victors. They were erased. Rescuing the memory of their suffering is an act of belated historical justice. They were not just collateral damage, they were strategic targets in a dehumanization campaign aimed at breaking the enemy's soul. Hulagu Khan is often seen only as a monster, but he was a brilliant strategist. He understood that to conquer a vast empire with a smaller army, he needed to use fear as a force multiplier. The destruction of Baghdad was a macabre play staged for a global audience. His coldness in dining over the caliph's body demonstrates an emotional detachment that is the trademark of the most ruthless conquerors. The irony of Al-Mustasim's gold deserves to be revisited. He died as the richest man in the world, yet unable to buy a cup of water. This teaches us about the illusory nature of material wealth in times of existential crisis. Gold is just metal when the society that values it collapses. The Caliph traded real security, armies, walls, alliances, for the false security of full vaults, and paid the ultimate price. The ecological impact of the invasion is an often overlooked aspect. The Mongols, coming from grassy steppes, did not understand the complex network of canals that sustained Mesopotamian agriculture. By destroying or neglecting these works, they caused desertification that lasted for centuries. The land died along with the people. Baghdad did not just lose its soul and its books, it lost the physical capacity to sustain life on a large scale. Despite the destruction, Human resilience found cracks. Some scholars managed to hide books in wells or flee with manuscripts sewn into their clothes. The knowledge that survived and reached Europe helped kindle the flame of the Renaissance centuries later. It is a testament that ideas are hard to kill, even when entire armies are dedicated to erasing them. The light flickered violently, but it was not extinguished completely. The Abbasid dynasty, which traced its lineage back to the Prophet's uncles, ended ignobly under hooves and boots. It is a humbling reminder of the impermanence of power. No family is sacred enough, no title is ancient enough to stop the march of history. The cycle of the rise and fall of empires turned its heavy wheel over Baghdad, and nothing could stop it, grinding everything in its path. The speed of the collapse is what scares most in this narrative. One moment, Baghdad was the center of the universe. The next week, it was a slaughterhouse. Normality is a very thin veil. People made plans, weddings were scheduled, deals closed. All of this was cancelled by the brutal reality of the invasion. Human life is incredibly vulnerable to sudden catastrophes that no one believes will happen until they are already happening. There is a crucial detail. Hulagu's wife, Doku's Khatun, was a Nestorian Christian. At her request, the Christians of Baghdad were spared the massacre and took refuge in churches. This shows that Mongol fury was selective and politically directed, not just an explosion of blind violence. There was a cold calculation behind every death. Hulagu was redrawing the demographic and religious map of the Middle East with the tip of his bloody sword. The silence of Muslim historians of the time regarding the specific details of sexual violence against the princesses is a sign of respect and deep shame. They did not want to record the final humiliation of their faith and their leaders. But foreign chronicles were more explicit. This difference in narrative shows us how history is shaped by who writes it. The women's pain was censored to protect the honor of male defeat. Imagine the caliph's last thought under the boards: regret, fear, or just total disbelief. He died in a state of deep shock and denial. The reality he built in his head did not match the physical weight of the feast on his body. Cognitive dissonance was his companion until the last suffocated breath. He departed this world without understanding how the universe could be so cruel to someone so chosen and special. The final lesson of Baghdad is clear and harsh. Civilization is not a natural right, it is a daily conquest that must be defended. It needs watchful guardians. Al-Mustasim failed because he thought culture defended itself. He forgot that the pen needs the sword to guarantee its right to write. Barbarism is always lurking at the gates, waiting only for a moment of weakness or arrogance to break them down. What if the caliph had fought? What if he had died on the wall, sword in hand, leading his men? The city would still have fallen before Mongol superiority, but dignity would have been saved. The shame of his passive surrender and pathetic death stained his memory more than the military defeat itself. History tends to forgive the defeated who fight bravely, but despises cowards who hide behind gold and empty titles. The ruins of ancient Baghdad are today buried under the modern city, but the soil is sacred and cursed. Archaeologists find layers of ash and debris dating specifically to 1258. The earth does not lie. The physical proof of the massacre is there, under the feet of current Iraqis. It is a geological reminder that the apocalypse already happened once in that place, leaving a scar that neither time nor reconstruction could completely erase. The carpet narrative is unique in the history of royal executions. There is nothing like it in other records. It is the perfect combination of mystical ritual and practical barbarism. It shows the alien mind of the Mongols to the peoples of the West. They brought a type of death that no one knew how to process or understand. It was the clash of civilizations in its most lethal form, where the rules of war on one side meant the total annihilation of the other. The dynasty ended without free heirs to claim the throne. The sons dead, the daughters enslaved and exiled. The family tree was cut at the root and burned. The void left by the Abbasids created a power vacuum that took centuries to fill, plunging the region into chaos. The world order was altered in that carpet. The geopolitical chaos that followed was the direct and bastard child of that act of concentrated violence. The extinction of the Abbasid lineage was not just a political event, it was a theological trauma. For the Islamic world of the time, seeing the shadow of God on earth crushed like an insect shook the very foundations of faith. Difficult questions echoed. How did God allow this? The brutal answer was on the bloody ground. Divinity does not protect against siege engineering and the ruthless military discipline of an enemy who fears nothing. After the massacre, the silence that fell over Baghdad was deafening. There were no market cries, no student debates, no calls to prayer, only the wind howling through the broken windows of empty palaces. That silence was the sound of cultural death. Baghdad, the eloquent voice of the world, had gone mute, and the whole world became a quieter, darker, and less brilliant place because of that forced silence. The city's recovery took generations and was never complete. People returned brick by brick, but the spirit was different. Intellectual audacity was replaced by caution and fear. The trauma of 1258 installed a deep dread in the regional psyche. The fear that if we go too far, if we are too brilliant or bold, we will attract the envy and destruction of the barbarians again. It was a wound in the collective soul. The Mongols eventually left or were absorbed, but they left behind the legend of their matchless ferocity. Hulagu became the boogeyman of Islamic history. His shadow hung over the Middle East for centuries. The mere mention of a horde coming from the east was enough to cause panic 500 years later. Transgenerational trauma is the final and most enduring legacy of this bloody conquest. But history is cyclical and ironic. Empires rise and fall like tides of blood. The Mongol Empire also fell, fragmented, and disappeared into the sands of time. Where are Hulagu's direct descendants today? Mixed into the anonymous crowd. Where is the memory of Al-Mustasim, preserved in eternal tragedy? In the end, victims and executioners become just dust and stories for us to tell. Time's justice is that it erases everyone equally. The lesson of responsibility remains vital for us today. A leader holds the life of his people in trembling hands. When he fails out of ego or inertia, the carpet is rolled out. May modern leaders look at 1258 and tremble with fear. May they understand that power is a temporary loan, not an eternal possession, and that the bill for mismanagement may come in the form of a relentless army on the horizon that accepts no bribes or excuses. As we close this dark chapter, remember the House of Wisdom. Remember the books dissolved in water. Knowledge is fragile and precious. It needs to be guarded, digitized, memorized, and protected. Because the fire always exists, ignorance is always lurking around the corner. And the only real defense against a new 1258 is the living, pulsing memory of what we tragically lost in the past. Ignorance is the fuel for the next bonfire. The Mongol horror was an extreme test for humanity. We failed to protect Baghdad that winter, but we survived to tell the story today. The narrative is our final victory over oblivion. Hulagu wanted to erase the caliph's memory and dignity, but here we are, 800 years later, talking about him. Memory is the only thing the heavy carpets and war horses could not completely crush. The sun sets on the invisible ruins of an empire that was once glorious. The echo of screams ceased long ago, but the lesson continues to echo. Arrogance precedes ruin. Wealth is no shield against fate, and civilization is a delicate dream that can be woken by a brutal nightmare at any moment. Be attentive to the world around you. Be prepared, for history does not forgive those who sleep on the watch. Take this story with you as an amulet against complacency. Remember the princesses lost in the steppes and the king crushed on the ground. Human history is made of blood and ink, and in Baghdad, the two mixed to write the saddest and most violent chapter of all. Do not let it be forgotten or repeated. We are the guardians of this painful memory, and it is our duty to keep it alive for the next generations. The Tigris River runs clean today, but history does not forget the blood of 1258. If this tragedy touched you, leave a like to honor the memory and subscribe to the channel to unearth more forgotten truths. Hit the bell now so you don't miss the next episode. Comment below. In your opinion, was the Caliph's arrogance as guilty as Hulagu's sword? Your voice keeps history alive. Until the next discovery.